Finally, cruise lines are putting together a string of great news. Since the pandemic started, it's been a setback after setback, delays, false starts, and more hurdles. Now, since any time since cruises have returned, there's more reason than ever to be optimistic about the future, including some comments from cruise executives that you don't want to miss. All of that is coming up right now. Hello, it is Tanner from Cruzely.com, and when it comes to the health crisis, you know that perhaps no industry has been so perfectly positioned to be impacted as cruising. They've made headlines, had trips delayed and rescheduled, and had to completely revamp the onboard experience. And that is on top of having to pause for 18 months. But the past few weeks have shown some very positive signs that aren't getting as much press as the negative news does. In fact, I count 3 big things that cruise lines and those that love them should be happy about. Let's talk first about those plummeting cases. When Omicron hit, it hit especially fast on land. The first word about the variant didn't even come until around Thanksgiving, but by New Year's, the virus was everywhere. Of course, if there are cases on land, then there will be cases at sea despite the protocols. This is especially the case for a variant that is more transmissible and evades vaccines. According to the CDC, there were about 5,000 cases on cruise ships it tracked in the second half of December. Since then, however, it has seemingly taken a U-turn just like on land. Now, we don't have official case counts, but we do have public comments from some cruise executives. Royal Caribbean Group CEO Jason Liberty, he said that cases on his company ships have been declining rapidly and have returned to pre-Omicron levels. He went on to say that they've averaged just a handful of cases per cruise among passengers and that, quote, it appears the worst is behind us. And Michael Bailey, who is the president of Royal Caribbean International, then said that he thinks we're moving into a better environment. And as such, the cruise line will start to remove many of the protocols that exist today while also working with the CDC on those changes. In fact, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Line, and Carnival have all made moves in the past few days to start easing some protocols, including those around masking and smoking in casinos. Then there is the comeback of, quote, green cruise ships. You may know that the CDC tracks all the cruise ships sailing or planning to sail in the United States. Each day, they assign a color status to this list of more than 100 ships, depending on case status on board. Now, the agency, they just revamped the entire color-coded tracking system, which frankly is a whole other YouTube video to explain. But one thing remains the same. If a ship is assigned green status, then it means there are no cases on board. Right before Omicron hit, the number of green ships peaked at 81 in mid-December. But from there, that number nosedived down to just 9 ships in mid-January, with most of those being ships that only had crew on board. Since then, however, things are turning back in the right direction. The latest count is that there are 29 ships that now have green status. And while the first ships to turn green were those with only crew, meaning that there weren't lots of passengers that were coming and going each day, we are now seeing ships carrying passengers turning green as well. So there is still a way to go to get back to the levels we saw before the latest Omicron wave, but things are quickly trending back in the right direction. Finally, and perhaps the biggest, is news that came from the CDC regarding a travel warning for cruise passengers. Now, back in late December, as the Omicron variant was ramping up, the CDC moved its warning level for cruises to level 4. That warning said that the public should, quote, avoid cruise travel regardless of vaccination status. So, even if you had your shot, if you were boosted, you wore a mask, and you stayed distant, the CDC still said that you shouldn't take a cruise. That's despite most people having to have the shot and test before boarding. But it didn't go as far as putting in a no-sail order like we saw in 2020. Yeah, it seems confusing to me too. But now that level 4 warning has been lowered to level 3. The CDC, they say now that travelers should be, quote, up to date with their COVID-19 vaccine before sailing. So, what does that actually mean? Well, if you had a 2-shot dose like Moderna or Pfizer, then it means having a booster at least 5 months after your second shot. If you had a 1-shot vaccine like Johnson & Johnson, then the CDC says you should get a booster of Pfizer or Moderna 2 months after that first shot. At least right now, however, most cruise lines aren't requiring booster shots. So, just like when the CDC said that people should avoid cruises, they were still allowed to sail. Now the CDC says that you should be up to date with your vaccine, but it is technically a suggestion, not a requirement to cruise. Even so, the fact that the agency decided to make this change is a positive sign for the cruise industry. CLIA, which is the industry's trade group, called it a, quote, step in the right direction, as cruise ships have by far the most stringent health protocols in travel, leading to lower cases that are most often mild or asymptomatic. In fact, of the 1.3 million passengers Royal Caribbean said that it has sailed with since it restarted cruising, only about 2,500, or less than 0.2%, tested positive on the ship. Now, this doesn't account for people that might test positive later or cruise cases. Even so, those numbers are pretty good. So, does all of this mean that cruising is about to return to what it was before the pandemic started? My guess is no, and the testing and vaccine protocols are likely to stick around unless it becomes clear that we are through the final wave of this crisis. So, don't expect any major changes just yet. But for an industry that's been battered from starts and stops, waves of the virus, and bad headlines, the past couple of weeks have finally delivered some good news for a change.